Hey guys, it's Sandy with Sandy Cogdell Designs, and today I have a tutorial to show you how I created this fun, colorful, summer-themed card. Be perfect for a girlfriend using the Cat Scrappiness 3D pop-up box craft die set. I just love this set. I think it's there's so many possibilities with it. I decided to make my little elements here move around. I've got them on acetate strips, so there is a little bit of movement, and I think that just adds a nice special touch to this card. What I used to create this card is the Cat Scrappiness, hold on, 3D pop-up die set, and the die set will cut out the background, which is this piece right here, and then the little, I call them bridges, the little bridge pieces that actually create the layers for the pop-up pieces. Now on my particular card, all I used for out of the rectangular pieces was this thinner one. That's where I put my sentiment. For the waves, I used the Wave Add-on 3D pop-up box craft die set, and I used the larger one and the mid-size one for my particular card. And the trio of friends here is from the fabulous Feathered Friends stamp set. And I love coloring these little ladies. They have so much personality and fun. They're just a really fun color. There's also a number of really good sentiments in this set. So it's definitely a fun one. I've got a couple of videos showing my coloring and a couple other ways to make cards with these little ladies. So, all right, let's get started. Okay. I have one piece of white cardstock that was 8.5 by 11, and I have cut it in half. Now I'm going to place the 3D pop-up box craft die set on each one of those papers. I'm not sure if I'm going to be using all of those rectangle pieces, but I'm going to cut them out anyway. I'm going to cut the waves out of another piece of white cardstock. You could also cut these waves out of a piece of colored cardstock if you wanted to do that. I just wanted to ink mine, so I'm using white cardstock. Now I have all my pieces to build my 3D pop-up box. So we will move on to ink blending. I've placed my 3 wave pieces on my sticky mat. I'm going to be using Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink along with my blending brush, and I'm just going to do a nice blend, soft color all the way across each one of those pieces. At this point, I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be using all 3 of the wave pieces, but I'll go ahead and ink them anyway. To add a little bit more dimension to those waves, I'm going to take my smaller blending brush along with some Mermaid Lagoon Distress Oxide ink, and I'm just going to add a little bit of that darker color at the bottom of my waves, keeping that lighter color up top. I decided that I wanted to put my sentiment on that very front of the box rather than up on the background piece. So I'm using the smallest of the rectangle pieces that is in the die set. I'm going to use some Kitsch Flamingo Distress Oxide ink, and I'm just going to do a nice even coat all the way across that piece. To add a little bit of shading to that piece, I'm going to take my smaller blending brush and I'm going to just dust up those edges with a little bit of picked raspberry Distress Oxide ink. I like to have multiple colors usually when I'm ink blending. For the piece that actually makes the box, I wanted to have my background in the center area, but I wanted to keep my little side panels a solid color. So I'm going to use some temporary tape here. I'm also using just some scrap cardstock because when I start ink blending, sometimes I get a little carried away and a little bit messy. But I'm going to tape off those little areas, and there it's very easy to do because there's an embossed line on there, so you know exactly where to line up that tape. And then I'm going to take a little bit of my Kitsch Flamingo um, Distress Oxide ink, and I will blend that color on both sides of those panels. Once I have that done, I will go back in with my smaller blending brush and add just a little bit of um, picked raspberry. Now I could have just run my sky and the base of my water all the way across, but I wanted a definite definition between the sides and the background. I'm covering up those side panels now, and what I want to do is I want to, a little bit of color at that bottom part of my background. I don't want my sky to go all the way down um, past those waves because that would just look kind of silly. So I'm going to use the very widest of the waves, little, it's like a bridge, I'll call it a bridge, and just kind of put a little tick mark where that ends. That way I know where I can blend my color up to. Using a scrap piece of cardstock again, I'm just going to blend in a little bit of that salvage patina, and that's just going to be the background of my water area in my box or my little scene here. I'm using some tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink to start laying in my clouds. Now I've got a cloud stencil from my stash, and I generally, when I work on my clouds, I start at the very top and I start moving down. Once I get almost to the bottom, I don't want my clouds going straight into that horizon line, so I'll stop a little bit above that and then just blend in some of my ink to make it look more real or more natural, so there's an actual horizon line on my ink blending. With the ink blending done, I am going to go ahead and fold in those two side panels. This is pretty easy to do. The die actually kind of embosses a little line there for you so that you know exactly where to fold it. Now I want to fold my little waves, and there's an embossed line on the end of each one of those. So I will do two of the waves and then the one pink rectangle that I inked that's going to have the sentiment on it. I'll just go ahead, fold those there, and I'm not gluing them just yet. Now I really wanted my sentiment to pop on this, so I decided I would go ahead and heat emboss it with black embossing powder. So here I'm just using my anti-static powder to dust up that rectangle, and then I'm going to use a little bit of watermark ink, and I'm going to get that sentiment stamped in the center of that little piece there. I will just put some of that black embossing powder over that inked area and then heat set it with my my heat gun. I don't know about you, but I get so weirded out when I get a lot of that embossing powder on my work surface. I don't like that gritty feel. It makes me crazy, so I'm constantly wiping it off when I'm heat embossing. Blah. All right, let's get these waves on. I am starting with the very largest one. I'm putting a little bit of glue on that folded tab, and then I am butting that up against where the fold is on those panels that fold in from the side on the background. I also want to train this paper at this point to close. So this card needs to be able to close, and I want to make sure that nothing folds or creases as I'm moving us back and forth. So I'm going to take my bone folder at this point and really give that a good press with it all the way in that flattened position. That way, that assures me that that card is going to close when it's in its flat position. I'm going to do the same exact thing with the medium-sized waves, and when I want to make sure that when I'm gluing these in here that they're not only butted up against the wave behind it, but it is also straight across at the bottom. You don't want one longer than the other because then your box is going to wobble. It all needs to line up. So I'm making sure that that one edge is butted up against the taller waves, and then I'm making sure when I do the other side that it is also butted up against those waves, but at the same time it is completely lined up with the taller waves so that when the box stands up, it's not going to wobble or tilt. I hope that makes sense. To finish up constructing this box, I'm going to now adhere the little pink piece that's got my sentiment on it, doing the exact same thing. However, this little piece does extend just a smidge past that panel, and that's okay because that's just going to give it a little bit extra support when it's open and standing up. Again, I'm making very sure that my bottom edge is lined up with the other two layers of waves because I don't want my card to wobble back and forth or flip forward or fall backwards. It's very important to make sure everything lines up on the very bottom straight across. Off camera, I have colored my fancy ladies here, and I do have a couple of other videos that show me coloring them and the colors that I used. I did a flamingo trio in a hot pink color, and then I did another one kind of in a fuchsia color. So you can refer to those videos if you want to know the colors and how I colored these little ladies. Right now, I'm just putting a little bit of glue on the bottom of their feet, and I am adhering them to that second layer there. So the medium-sized waves, that's where they're going to be standing. I colored a few extra hibiscus flowers and little fancy drinks because I wasn't quite sure what and where I was going to put them all. But I'm going to adhere the smallest hibiscus over to the right side of my sentiment on that front band. On the left side of that band, there really wasn't enough room for another hibiscus, so I decided I'd go ahead and use one of my extra fancy drinks. I wanted to have a little bit of movement on this card, so I decided I would actually take very thin strips of acetate, acetate, and glue them to the back of one of the larger hibiscus, one of the smaller ones, and then one of the fancy drinks. And I'm going to be attaching those to the back of that last wave. And while the card, is stationary, it doesn't really move. But if there's any type of wind, it kind of wiggles those pieces, and it just kind of makes that card really fun. So that's why I decided I would use the little acetate strips. It just, it's just one of those little extra things that make some of these cards that we make so much fun. I'm starting in the center. I'll put a little bit of glue at the bottom of that acetate strip, and I will adhere it to that third layer of waves. I'm just kind of playing around with it until I get it in the center. I do want to make sure that that flower is not extending over the top of that background, because then your card's not going to fit in the envelope. Next, I'll do the exact same thing with my smaller little hibiscus flower, and that I'm putting to the left side of my little 3D box here. And I want to make sure that when that box opens and closes, that is not in the way or preventing that box to close. So you just kind of got to be really careful when you're putting those in there. And then I'm just going to add my little drink over to the right hand side of that card, making sure that when the card is in its flat position or folded flat position, that it's not impeding the folding of that card. So I'll add just a wee bit of glue and get that inserted in there. And to finish up this card, I just want to make sure that it will fold flat and that I have trimmed any of the little acetate pieces that might be extending out that would prevent the card from standing straight up. And I just think this card is so fun. Oh my goodness, I just love the way this card turned out. I think it is just so fun and bright and cheerful. I will list all the products that I use down below. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my channel. That way you can be notified every time I post a new video. You can also follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill or on my blog, sandycogdilldesigns.com. All right, until next time, bye-bye.